Are you still in search of that one camera lens you need for your next trip? You know, the one lens that'll do it all for you? A lens with a good range for wide shots of landscapes and close shots for details and portraits? The best lens for this is the Sony 24-105 f4. Let's talk about how this lens offers you what you want, my experience, its limitations, and even how this lens compares to other zoom lenses like it. Hey fam, mga kapatid, I'm Mike, nurse photographer and videographer, and I make videos about camera gear and camera tutorials for new photo and video shooters. Whether you're going away for a travel trip or shooting everyday life, the Sony 24-105 is going to meet the needs of the everyday photo and video shooter, recreationally and professionally. Will you have to worry about switching out lenses to get your shot? Nope. If you're exposing manually, are you gonna have any issues with this lens? Nope. Unlike most, if not all kit lenses that automatically change the aperture when you zoom in and zoom out, this lens has a constant aperture of f4. Kit lenses, when they're zoomed out, start like f3.5, but once you start zooming in, it goes all the way up to 5.6, or stops down to f6, f5.6. Yeah, but this lens is great because you don't have to worry about changing your settings every time you zoom in, which isn't a big deal if you're shooting in auto, but if you're shooting in manual, this is a huge pain in the butt. And you don't have to worry about changing your exposure settings every time you zoom in and zoom out. Another thing about this lens is that its great range of 24mm to 105mm, which is more than enough for a run and gun shooter. Another thing to note is its weather sealing, as it is part of Sony's G set of lenses, and usually those lenses are weather sealed. That's right, not weatherproof, but weather sealed. Don't get it twisted. Your lens may survive some light rain, but don't go jumping or throwing this into some crazy water situations. You may still need an underwater casing for more ambitious aquatic adventures. You know what I mean. In my experience, I've used this lens mostly for travel, portraits, and events. This is the lens you want to take whatever you want to shoot. You want to do street? Great, this lens can do it. Vlogging at 24mm, it's doable. Want to do portraits? Boy, you bet. Shooting in the daytime is no issue. f4 is the lowest that it'll stop down to, and that will shoot whatever you need. In order for me to get wide shots, I'm at 24mm for my environment to help give more context of my scene and surrounding. I could even zoom in a little bit more at 35mm if I want to frame a specific shot of the environment. Then I just gotta zoom in a little bit more to 35 or 50mm for portraits or everyday shooting from food to animals. Then we could just stop up a little bit more in between 70 to 105, which gives me a little more bokeh, or at least more separation of my subject and my background. Yeah, it's nice if you have fast lenses like an f1.2, f1.4 for portraits, but you can still get a nice separation from your background with this focal length. Optical steady shot. If you need stabilization, Sony's got you covered with the optical steady shot in this camera lens. It does make a big difference because I have used this camera lens on a camera body that has no built-in stabilization. I did it by mistake because I was so used to not having stabilization that when I put this lens on the camera, it took me to realize that I accidentally switched off the optical steady shot. I mean, look at these examples. Tell me what you think. Do you see the difference? Of course, it's great if you pair a stabilized lens like this with a stabilized camera body like the A7S III, which I'm currently filming with now. And on the Sony A7S III, I'm usually filming with active stabilization on. And although using active stabilization causes a 1.1 crop, it is worth it to have a nice stable shot handheld. And this is most used for static shots. In regards to portrait photography, again, f4, still good enough for me to get that separation, especially when I'm zooming in between 70 to 105mm. If space is an issue and I can't get as far back as I want to, I can get closer and walk in with a 35 or 50mm focal length and still have a decent amount of separation. When it comes to full frame versus crop body sensors and how this lens performs, I have to say that the autofocus for both photo and video still works great. This lens was great when it came to eye autofocus and face tracking, didn't have any problem. If low light wasn't an issue, I would actually prefer to use this on my Sony a6400, just because I can get a little bit more reach on a smaller sensor. As a full frame lens, when paired with an APS-C or crop sensor body, instead of getting a 24mm focal length as your widest angle, you're getting more of a 35mm focal length. Instead of getting a 105mm focal length zoomed all the way outwards or inwards, you're getting more of like a 158mm with that Sony crop factor, and that's 1.5. If you're wondering if this lens performs any different between a full frame body and a crop sensor body, it was absolutely the same for me. The eye autofocus and the face tracking worked absolutely fine for me between the crop sensor and the full frame body. So if you have any doubts about that, I would still be able to pick this up and have trust in that autofocus. If there's any con that I could actually pick out about this lens is that it's an f4. Now, if you're a beginner and you don't know too much about other lenses that are out there in the market, people like to go for those like zoom lenses that are like f2.8. Now, what's the difference between f2.8 and f4? It's really one thing, one stop of light. This lens at f4 is not a terrible performer at all, especially in the daytime, but once the sun goes down, that can easily be a different story if you don't have enough light. Although I do use the low light king of a camera, the Sony a7S III, I still don't get the cleanest image at f4 while I'm running and gunning in the dark, or in the darker situations. Because of this reason, when I'm limited on light, if I'm shooting indoors, I still try to shoot with prime lenses rather than this 24-105. But if I don't have prime lenses, I'm just gonna try to use the best light sources that I have, whether I have my own lights, or I have to go near a window, or I just have to use the brightest light in the room for some janky angle, or whatever the best angle may be. Now, if you had a zoom lens that was f2.8, you can clean up your image a little bit and you can save on some grain because you have to bump up your ISO just to get in more light into your sensor. But tell me about you. What zoom lens are you currently using or eyeing for? Let me know in the comments down below. When it comes to packing my camera bag, the Sony 24-105 f4 is an easy lens for me to pick. It's a portrait lens, it's a landscape lens, it's my event lens. If you're still using an APS-C camera or a crop sensor body camera, I highly recommend the Sony 18-105 f4. But if you're planning to go full frame, definitely consider getting this for your APS-C camera, especially if you already have a wide angle lens like the Sigma 16mm f1.4 like I do. As I mentioned, when you stick this lens on your crop body camera, your 24mm actually becomes a 35mm. However, in this case, if you have the 16mm, this becomes more like your 24mm. So you pretty much get your focal lengths covered. Once you're done with all your wide shots, just use this. If you need a zoom lens that gives you an extra stop of light for better low light performance, you want to be looking at the 16-35, 24-70, or the 70-200 lenses at f2.8 for full frame. For APS-C or crop sensor bodies, you want to be looking at like 16-55, 70-70, 18-50, around there. These lenses don't have to have the same kind of zoom range as the 24-105, but the extra step of light makes it so that you don't have to raise that ISO and ultimately giving you a cleaner image. At the end of the day, of course, depending on your shooting style, you want a nice clean image, especially in dark places. For me, I hardly shoot in the dark, so the 24-105 is here to stay. How about you? Do you think it's worth it? Because if you're daring to venture away from zoom lenses, perhaps you would like to see what prime lenses can offer you. So check out these videos over here. I'm Mike, thanks again for watching. Now go out there and shoot for the life that matters. See ya!